You're listening to the Music Tech Teacher Podcast, episode number 10. Welcome to the Music Tech Teacher Podcast. Music tech tips, lesson ideas, advice, news, and interviews, especially for music teachers. Brought to you by midnightmusic.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Music Tech Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Wardrobe. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about some awesome sound samples which were released by NASA quite some time ago now, and it's only really this year that I've started using them in workshops and a couple of conference presentations. So I thought today I'd talk about the ways that you could use them creatively in your music classes. If you'd like to download the information from today's episode, you can go to midnightmusic.com.au/10. And I'll mention this link again at the end of the episode. So as I mentioned, NASA has made a huge collection of audio recordings available under a Creative Commons license, and they're really perfect for using in music tech projects with students. They would also be great in cross-curricular type activities. So if you are, also teaching other subjects or want to pass on this information to teachers for English or literacy subjects and media, I think they'd be great in many, many different subject areas. So the collection of recordings are from historic space flights and also from more recent missions as well. And I really love this collection. There's sounds in the collection of stars and sounds made by planets and satellites and rocket launches. And in addition to the actual space sounds, there are recordings of astronauts and ground crew and speeches given about the space program itself. The collection includes original, iconic sound bites, I suppose you'd call them, from astronauts and staff working in the control center, like the Houston We Have a Problem soundbite and the One Small Step, quote that you hear a lot from Neil Armstrong, and things like the Apollo 11 launch countdown. Now you can listen to the sounds and dialogue samples on the audio sharing website SoundCloud. SoundCloud itself is a great website if you ever need to share audio. A lot of schools do actually use it to share student work and, not necessarily publicly, but it's a great place to upload and listen to audio files. And the great thing about SoundCloud is that when you have an audio file uploaded to that website, you can actually leave a comment on the timeline of the audio file that's playing. So for schools that are using it with their students, it's great that you can have the audio file play through and you as a teacher might click in the waveform at a certain point in that audio file and you can leave a comment there. So it's great if you're doing collaborative work with students, they can leave comments for each other during the actual piece of music or audio file. And as a teacher, you can leave your comments right there in the timeline. So it sort of saves you doing that whole, okay, at bar 3, I think this was great where you did this, but perhaps you'd like to, add a different chord sequence at that point. And instead of writing that out, in a piece of paper or in a Word document or something, you can actually click in the timeline and leave the comment there so the student can see it pop up in real time. So this is the place that NASA is using to share these sounds. Now you can also download them from the NASA website as well. I like the SoundCloud interface, so I tend to go to that one. And when you go to their SoundCloud page, you'll see a series of playlists. So SoundCloud's a little bit like YouTube in that, that you can watch individual videos on YouTube and you can also see playlists on YouTube as well. And SoundCloud works in a similar way. So you can see an individual audio track and you can also see collections of audio tracks in the same category. So NASA has organised these, the different sound samples that they have into playlists, and you can click on the title of the playlist and it will take you to that playlist page. So there might be, for instance, a collection of rocket launch sounds, and if you click on the rocket launch sound playlist, it'll take you to the page where all of those tracks are listed. Now, when you are on that page, that's where you can actually download the sound. So you do need to click through to the playlist first. And when you're on the playlist page, you can hover your mouse over the end of a track, I think it's the end, and a little more button will appear with a download option there. You can just play them back straight ahead on the website too and just listen to each one to hear what they sound like. The sounds that I've downloaded from their collection, and look, their collection is really big, so you won't want students to sort of be using all of them, but I downloaded a sample of different types of sounds. So I downloaded the Houston We Have a Problem soundbite.
Houston, we've had a problem.
I've got the One Small Step for Mankind one. I've got the Apollo 11 countdown.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
The Eagle has landed. I downloaded the John F. Kennedy speech, We Chose the Moon. I also got a launch sound effect, a Kepler star sound effect, a Sputnik beep, a spooky kind of Saturn sound effect, and a Quindar tone, and a few more as well. And I wanted to get a bit of a variety of different types of sounds for a couple of projects that I've been working on. Now, if you're a member of my Midnight Music online professional development community, you can save yourself a bit of time if you want to and download my actual collection. I've put up the ones that I've downloaded from the NASA sound set. And I've got them in an area there called the Music Tech Resource Bank. So there's some files there which are quite useful for music tech projects, and my collection of NASA sounds is in there. Now, after the break, I'm going to share with you 7 different ways that you can use these NASA sounds in your classes, and sort of they're like project ideas or lesson ideas, standalone or maybe even part of a larger project or a unit of work. This episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast is brought to you by the Midnight Music Community. The Midnight Music Community is an online space for music teachers who'd like help using technology in their music lessons. There are online courses, video tutorials, lesson plans, music tech news, and professional development certificates are provided for any training that you undertake. I'm inside the community every day, personally answering members' questions and sharing tips and ideas. The best thing is that you get to connect with hundreds of other music teachers just like you and share your own experiences and occasional music tech frustrations. For more information and a special joining price just for the listeners of this podcast, visit midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. That's midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. When I first came across the NASA sound samples, it really became apparent that they'd be so cool to use in music tech projects. And I had a little think and came up with a list of some options of ways they could be used in music education. Now, some of these will suit younger students and some are really better for older students, but I thought I'll share them all with you and you can take whatever might be useful for you in your situation at school. Now, the first one I think could work really with any age group, and that might be to conduct a mystery listening quiz, a type of a guess that sound game. And you could play students a selection of samples that you've downloaded. You want to make sure that you're not showing them the name of the audio file at this point, so I wouldn't have your laptop attached to a data projector, but just have the sound playing through speakers. And see if students can actually guess what the sound is. You could perhaps tell them that they're from the NASA website, so they're all space related in some way, and then play them the sound and see if they can take a guess at what it might be. Now, I would be surprised if there are any, certain answers like, oh yes, that's definitely this, apart from maybe one of the rocket launch sounds. But the star sounds and planet sounds that they've recorded from space are quite mysterious. So I think you could award points for the nearest guess. That might be the way to go. Another idea is that you could have students choose just one of the sound samples, maybe one that they pick themselves or one that you've chosen for them. And they could use audio editing software to edit that sound sample in lots of different ways. And you could perhaps see how many different ways that they can come up with different versions of the same sound sample. Now, this is a great exercise for developing audio editing skills, and it can be quite easy to do. So they could do things like trimming the sound so that it's shorter. So maybe they'll just take the slice out of the middle of the sound if it's a long one, and that might be their edited version of the sound sample. They could pitch shift the sound. So in the case of that drone sound that I mentioned, you could actually change the pitch of the sound sample so that it's higher or lower, and it can sound really quite different when it's changed. They could lengthen it or reverse it or speed it up or slow it down or use some effects like compression or equalization, repeat. There's lots and lots of options here, and it's quite easy to do. So the basic steps are that the students will import the sound sample into an audio editing program and then use the options within that program to change it in some way. The program that I love for this is a free one, and it's Audacity, which a lot of schools have on school laptops and school, lab computers. It's a free program and it works on Macs and PC computers too. Now, Audacity is great because it's really easy. You can drag the sound sample in, and then students can select the sound sample and actually go to the effect menu and then choose from a massive list of different things, like some of those things I mentioned. So changing the pitch, for instance, there's an option for that in the effects menu. They can go there, adjust a slider to make the sound go higher or lower, and click OK, and then the sound sample will change. There's also options in there to reverse the sound and, like the ones I mentioned before, speed it up or slow it down, and so on. Audacity is also really good for chopping up sounds. So if you've got a really long sound sample, just to take a slice out of the middle of it or to chop the end off is really easy. You can place the cursor in the timeline where you want to make that cut, and then select everything from that point onwards and just press delete, and that will shorten the sound sample really quickly. They could even do some things like adding automation, so fade in or a fade out, or changing the volume level throughout a longer sound so the sound goes in and out, or change the panning from left to right speaker or headphone when you're listening to it. Now, all of those things, or a lot of those things, can be done in other programs that you might already be using. So you don't have to use Audacity. That's just the one I find is a really great tool for this project. But you could also use things like GarageBand on Macs, or Mixcraft on PCs, or Acid Music Studio, or Soundtrap is a fantastic program. Ableton Live and Logic, and all of those programs have options to do this sort of editing. So it's a great way to get students started with audio editing, and they will use those skills then in lots and lots of other projects. Now, a quick one, if you're working with young students, third option here, third lesson idea, is that you could pick a selection of sounds which are a variety of low sounds, high sounds, and sounds that are somewhere in the middle, and get the students to sort those sound samples into low, medium and high, or low, middle and high. That could be a nice quick exercise if you're doing pitch type exercises with those students. A fourth idea is to select one of the dialogue type samples, so one where astronauts are speaking, or the people in the Houston Ground Control Center, or one of the John F. Kennedy speeches, and you could use this to do some audio editing as well. So students could take one of those dialogue pieces and maybe switch the order of words around. So again, using something like Audacity or one of those other programs I mentioned, they could cut the sample up into different words or phrases and then move the pieces around like a jigsaw puzzle to reorder them and then play them back. Again, it's a great way to practice some audio editing skills. And the other option is that you could actually do this ahead of class yourself and then get the students to reorder the words, work out what they should be, and get them to put it back together in a program like Audacity. I've done that sort of task before with other things, and it works really quite well. I've recorded some dialogue between a couple of people, and then we've used our audio editing skills to put the dialogue in the correct order. So it was recorded in the correct order in the first place, and then I messed it up and then gave that file to, it was actually teachers in a workshop, gave that file to them, and then they reordered them to practice their audio editing skills. The fifth idea is to again use one of those dialogue recordings, or just part of the recording. It can be just a single word or a couple of words, is to use a little part of those recordings in a song or another musical composition. These are around at the moment, the sorts of R&B or hip hop type songs where there might be some rapping interspersed with singing, and just instrumental stuff. This can work quite well if you just pick a couple of words and use this on a track in one of those type of projects. So it might be a song that students are putting together, and they might use a word repeatedly or in a rap sort of style. And again, the audio editing skills come into play here. They can take the word and then place it at different times on the timeline so that it plays back in a specific rhythm or just at certain times during the song. Idea number 6 is to use a combination of low, middle and high samples, again, which you could choose or the students could choose, and to use those to put together a space drum pattern, which sounds a bit funny, but if you have a low, middle and high sound, you can use those to match them up to the sounds of a drum kit, the 3 main sounds of a drum kit that are used to make, say, a rock pattern, a basic rock pattern. So the low sound will be equivalent to the bass drum or kick drum. The middle sound's going to be the snare, and the high sound could be your hi-hat type replacement. And then in one of those software programs, your digital audio workstation, you can place each of the samples at specific positions in the bar to put together a drum pattern. This works well as a follow-on activity. So if you've been doing drum patterns with students and perhaps you've done some playing of drum patterns and you might have done body percussion version, and then you've talked about how the pattern looks in a notation format and, you know, the order of sounds in the bar and so on, this could be a great follow-on activity from that where they actually make a drum pattern in one of those digital audio workstation programs. Now, my last project is a little bit more in depth, and this is one where you could use the NASA sound samples to create a full-blown found sounds, in inverted commas, found sounds project. And this is, you know, where you can put together lots and lots of different NASA sounds to make a whole piece of music. I know it's a bit funny to be calling NASA sounds found sounds, but you get the idea. You might be familiar, there's a YouTube channel which is run by a guy named Andrew Huang, and he does some amazing found sound pieces which use things like sounds from a light bulb or sounds from tires or, you know, car wheels or sounds from a Greyhound bus. And he puts together, basically records sounds from these objects and then puts them together in a musical way. So he creates a rhythmic piece out of all these different sounds and sometimes has pitched elements in there too. And this is a great piece, particularly for older students. So this would be one I would imagine doing definitely in secondary school and would work really well with older upper secondary students. So year 8, 9, 10 kind of age and older. So you can use the sounds as they are. Students could also edit the sounds so that they become a little bit different. So a low sound they could maybe use in multiple ways. They could use the low sound in its original format. I'm thinking about that Kepler star sound again. They could also transpose it to make it higher and use that in the piece too. They could shorten the sounds and so on. And even use some of the pitch sounds. So I've been putting together some training materials in my online community, and I've made myself a couple of example projects. It's really, really best if you can do the project yourself before you go and do it with students, just to get a feel for how it works and what the pitfalls might be. And so I've been putting one together myself, and I've ended up creating 2 different NASA sound pieces. The first one is a piece which includes some pitched elements, and I used just 3 of the NASA sounds for that one. The Kepler star drone, a Sputnik beep, and a second Kepler star sound which is right at the very end. I also added some software instruments, keyboard chords that all happen to include the pitch of the drone and work really well with that, and also a melody line too. I'll play that example now. You'll hear the drone at the very beginning, which goes throughout the whole piece. You'll hear the keyboard chords after that come in and the melody line, and the Sputnik beep comes in just over halfway through, and it's a repeated high pitch, so you'll hear that one really clearly. And then at the very end, the second Kepler star sound is heard, and that just sort of finishes off the piece. So here's that example now. The second example project I created is a piece where I've got a rhythmic pattern which uses small snippets of sound. So I've taken just a little part of a rocket launch sound and a couple of star sounds, and again that Sputnik beep because it's a really good rhythmic repetitive sound, and I've used those to make kind of like a drum pattern. I've also taken parts of the Houston We Have a Problem dialogue and used them at different times. So you can hear some of that at the very beginning of the piece. And then sometimes I've chosen to use just a single word from that, like the word problem. And also occasionally I've used a phrase of, sort of a little part of a sentence or something like that from the dialogue too, and use that interspersed with the kind of rhythmic parts of the piece. I'll play you that example now as well. It's just under 1 minute in length.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Say again, please.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Say again, please. Houston, say again, please. Okay, stand by, 13. We're looking at it.
If you're going to do one of these creative projects which involves students using or manipulating the NASA sounds, one of the tips that I can offer is to select a range of the sound effects and samples and download them ahead of time yourself on behalf of your students. Doing this achieves a few things. Even though it would be nice to send the students off to have a listen to all of them and download them themselves, it can take a lot of valuable class time. So if part of your objectives of a lesson is to get them to listen to lots of different things and to make some choices about sounds and what they're going to use in the project, by all means do that as part of the class, but it does take a lot of time. So if that's not part of your objective, if you really want them to get onto the creative part where they're manipulating the sounds and editing them and putting them together, then it might be best if you do that ahead of time. There are really an overwhelming number of sounds available, and I think, in my experience, I think people perhaps work better with some limitations imposed, so a short list of sounds to work with rather than a really huge long list. Sometimes you can be a little bit more creative when you've provided with a few more restrictions, which sounds a bit weird, but if you're just given one sound, for instance, then you have to be quite creative with that single sound in manipulating it and changing it so that you end up with a variety. Just something to think about. You can also determine the type of sound samples that the students are going to work with. So whether you want them to have access to that dialogue or whether you just want them to use more of the space sound effects or just the launch sounds or a combination of all of those things. That was what I ended up with, a nice combination or a variety of the sounds. If you do want some further help with these projects, I'm currently putting together some training materials for inclusion in the new online course materials that I'm doing for GarageBand and Mixcraft and Soundtrap and Audacity inside the Midnight Music community. So I'm working on videos which will introduce the project, plus a walkthrough of the how-to steps, some examples that you can see on the screen, and then the actual how-to instructions for each of those software programs. If you're a current member of the community, you don't need to do anything. You'll have access to all of that as soon as I've put it in there, when I've had a chance to finish making it all. But if you're not a member and you'd like to join, you can find a special offer price for podcast listeners at midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. Thanks for listening today. I hope you have some useful ideas for using those NASA sounds or similar things like that in your music tech projects with students. You can find more information and links from today's episode at midnightmusic.com.au/10. And if you head over there, I'll have a list that you can download of all the things that I've suggested for using those sounds in your classes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.